Yeah, so in teen years, you know, we always heard about the Jackaloni crew because we're from the east side of Detroit. And we're from lower working class. And, the movies misrepresent how it really is. The gangsters had mutual respect for working class people and vice versa. We were taught never to talk about it, and they worked hand in hand. Not that the working class people worked with the gangsters, they just had respect for them. It was like this. I'm Polish and Italian descent, and Detroit's got a huge Polish community, just like Chicago. And Detroit at the time, Hamtramck, is a city within the bounds of Detroit. And it was a perfect fit for the gangsters. According to the boss, who I used to hang out with, Vito Giacalone, it was a great combination of sorts because the Polish community was so tight knit, and they weren't involved necessarily in organized crime to the extent that the Italians were, or even the Jewish people were. But they ran all the swag through Hamtramck, and it's a perfect location. You see, in Hamtramck's a closed community, so they been generally police themselves. So when the truckloads of goods would come through, they'd run their swag through Hamtramck. And this swag, by the way, is an acronym for stuff we all get, stolen goods. And so nobody talked on anybody. And the Polish people were so loyal at the time that the gangsters, they used to make a joke about it, that in the Polish community, the last thing you want to do is screw with a drunk Polak. So, and the Polish people were glad to pay their tribute because they're very loyal. That was in the 70s. Now, we're growing up as a teenager. You always heard about this and heard about that. Well, then when Jimmy Hoffa, what was it, 1972, what was I, 12, something like that, 11, 12 years old? I had just met Jimmy Hoffa at a fish fry for some union event when I went with my father. And so it was just national news. They call it the biggest story of the 70s. So, the mob was at their peak here in Detroit, a very high level, profit level organization, crime syndicate. Um, so, when I used to see these guys at a restaurant down the street, Mr. Paul's, um, I was my first bar that I had a drink in. I was 16, and, my uncle was sitting with them. And then when after this Hoffa incident, they always had their own closed little section. But I met them as a teenager. And then later in life, I ended up hanging out with these guys. So it was kind of, I don't know if I wasn't fascinated by the gangsters. I wasn't fascinated by working for a living either. But, I saw these guys work for a living, and they worked for management, and they were very loyal and dedicated, or they were just drunks in between jobs. That's the only kind of people I knew. Or they were gangsters on the Italian side, and they were always, they might have had Cadillacs and some money and all this status, and then the next day they're off going to prison. So I had one uncle that was really high up, but he could never be made because got pinched for narcotics, and he did 12 years in Jackson prison in Michigan. Incidentally, the largest walled prison at the time um, in the country. But anyway, I just like to keep things historically accurate.